Before Florida was beaches and highways, before theme parks, before millions arrived each year, there was only water, grass, sky, and silence. The southern tip of the state is still dominated by one of the largest wetlands in North America, a slow-moving river of grass stretching for miles in every direction. A place so flat and so dense, you can lose your sense of distance in minutes, where the air smells of mud and salt and decay, where sound travels strangely, and where, even today, there are corners few people ever enter. For generations, people who lived and worked out here have reported encounters with something unexplained, something big, something that walks upright, something that smells wrong. They call it the skunk ape. This is the history of how a legend grows. Everglades National Park alone protects 1.5 million acres of wilderness. That's larger than the entire state of Delaware. But the Everglades aren't a single open marsh. They're a maze. Cypress domes rising like islands, mangrove tunnels thick as walls, palmetto scrub so dense you can't see 10 feet ahead. Step off a trail, and you disappear. Search and rescue teams know this intimately. In 2015, a hiker went missing near the Anhinga Trail. Helicopters flew overhead. GPS marked his last known position. It still took searchers 4 days to find him, less than half a mile from where he'd started. Visibility is short. Landmarks repeat. Water hides tracks within hours. The Everglades is nearly 4,000 square miles of territory where large animals move unseen every day. Black bears, Florida panthers, alligators longer than pickup trucks. If something wanted to stay hidden here, it wouldn't be the first. The oldest written reference to something strange in South Florida's swamps may come from an 1818 letter by a surveyor working near the Caloosahatchee River. He described his Seminole guides refusing to enter certain areas, places they said belonged to a wild man who walks like smoke. Whether this referred to a spiritual belief, a territorial warning, or something else, the surveyor couldn't say. He noted only that his guides were serious, and that he chose not to argue. By the late 1800s, as settlers, hunters, and trappers pushed deeper into the region, similar stories began appearing in personal accounts. Something large crashing through brush at night. Livestock disturbed. Strange tracks in soft mud. In 1942, the Naples Daily News printed a brief item about hunters near Collier's Seminole State Park reporting an animal of unusual size walking on 2 legs. No follow-up was published, but the report wasn't unique. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, small-town papers across South Florida occasionally noted odd calls to sheriff's offices. A hairy man near the road. Something screaming in the woods. A large animal walking upright. Almost always dismissed. Almost always unexplained. The nickname came from something witnesses mentioned repeatedly. Not just how it looked, how it smelled. A powerful stench, rotten eggs, wet fur, stagnant water. The kind of odor that clings to the air long after the source has moved on. Hunters compared it to a skunk, but bigger, stronger. Skunk ape wasn't scientific. It wasn't official. It was just what locals started calling it. And by the early 1970s, the name had stuck. Between 1970 and 2000, Florida's population more than doubled, from 6.7 million to over 15 million people. New subdivisions pushed closer to wilderness. Interstate 75, Alligator Alley, cut straight through the heart of the Everglades in 1968. More people meant more eyes and more reports. Drivers claimed something tall crossed the highway at night. Fishermen described movement along tree lines. Campers reported heavy footsteps circling tents after dark. In 1974, the Fort Myers News Press ran a feature titled "The Mystery of the Swamp Monster," after multiple sightings were reported near Fakahatchee Strand. Local police investigated. They found no suspect, only tracks, large, humanoid, pressed into soft ground near a drainage canal, and an unusual odor lingering in the brush. The tracks were photographed but never conclusively identified. Wildlife officers suggested bear. Witnesses insisted otherwise. The reports kept coming. So much so that in 1977, Florida State Representative Paul Nuckols introduced legislation to protect the creature. Formally targeting anthropoid or humanoid animals, the bill would have made it a crime to harm or capture the skunk ape. It never passed. But the fact that it was introduced at all suggests how seriously some communities were taking the reports. For the next 20 years, the skunk ape returned to the shadows of the cypress heads. The stories didn't stop. They just became quieter. Until the year 2000, when a single anonymous letter arrived at the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office and turned a local ghost story into a national headline. Inside were 2 photographs. The letter, signed only as "I don't want my name revealed," explained that the writer's elderly mother had taken the pictures in her backyard near Myakka River State Park. Something had been raiding her apple basket at night. When she investigated one evening, she saw it. The photographs show a large, dark figure crouched among palmetto fronds. Broad shoulders, long arms, hair covering the body, the face obscured by shadow and distance. The images are blurry, shot at night, likely with a cheap camera, but they're also unlike typical hoax photos. No clear pose, no obvious costume seams, just a bulky shape, partially hidden. The sheriff's office released the photos to the public, hoping someone might identify the animal. Instead, the images went viral. Wildlife experts offered explanations: a black bear foraging, an escaped chimpanzee, even an orangutan, though none were reported missing in Florida. Others examined the proportions and argued the figure was too large, the arms too long. The photographs remain unexplained, but they did something important. They moved the skunk ape from local folklore into the national conversation. Biologists tend to be cautious. Extraordinary animals require extraordinary evidence. Tracks, hair samples, skeletal remains. None have been conclusively tied to an unknown primate in Florida. The simpler explanations are well documented. Florida black bears can weigh over 400 pounds. When they stand upright to sniff the air, they look surprisingly human from a distance. Wild hogs produce screams that sound disturbingly like a person in distress. And the smell? Wetlands constantly release methane and sulfur gases as organic matter decays. A sudden pocket of that air can be overwhelming. Combine low light, dense vegetation, and isolation, and the brain begins assembling shapes that may not be there. It's a phenomenon called pareidolia, seeing faces and figures in random patterns. From a scientific standpoint, misidentification explains most sightings, but not all. And some reports, multiple witnesses, clear conditions, detailed descriptions, resist easy dismissal. It's that small margin of uncertainty where legends survive. The skunk ape isn't unique. The Pacific Northwest has Bigfoot. The Himalayas have the Yeti. Louisiana's swamps have the Honey Island swamp monster. Every major wilderness seems to have one. Anthropologists suggest these stories serve a function. They mark boundaries. They express our unease with the wild. They remind us that not everything is mapped, cataloged, and controlled. In Florida's case, the timing matters. The skunk ape legend solidified just as the Everglades faced unprecedented development pressure. as wetlands were drained, as highways carved through habitat, as wilderness shrank. Perhaps the legend grew because people needed it to. A way of saying, something still lives here that we don't understand. Something that belongs. Something we haven't conquered. Whether the skunk ape is real or not, the story performs real work. It keeps people curious about the Everglades. It keeps them a little bit cautious. It keeps the swamps feeling wild. No bones have been found. No hair samples confirmed. No animal captured. Just decades of reports. Passed from ranger to ranger, hunter to hunter, neighbor to neighbor. For some, that's enough to dismiss it entirely. For others, it's enough to wonder. Because out here, the trees block the horizon. The water swallows sound. And once the sun goes down, you can only see a few feet in any direction. But something out there might see much farther.